If you want to paint emotive abstract portraits in watercolor, this is the class for you. Professional artist Arleesha Yetzer will teach you how to get started. You will learn what areas of the face require warm or cool tones, as well as which colors should be avoided to prevent them from becoming muddy. She'll teach you how to use layering to give dimension, and also show you how dark we can go when using the transparent medium of watercolor. Today's free clip is taken from Arleesha's full portrait class, and you can continue watching it for free at etcherstudio.com.
First of all, I really like working with a limited palette. So I really like to limit myself to just like 2 to 4 colors or so, because I can mix them with each other and it helps to keep the palette more cohesive. So all the colors work together a bit more. Lately, I tend to rely pretty heavily on colors with a lot of transparency and not a lot of granulation, because it helps me to get these sort of light, like ethereal layers. And if the color has too much granulation, it's more difficult to get that clean look. So I'm going to be using basically a primary triad of a phthalo blue, a nice middle of the road red, and I'm probably going to go with a cool yellow. I like to use like a cooler yellow, as opposed to, this one obviously has a lot of red in it, but I like to use a cooler yellow because I like the mixes that it makes with the red. So this is technically, when I was filming an example piece for this is the second one I made. The first one I made uses the same reference image and the same 3 colors that I just mentioned, and that's this one. So there's a lot of difference in the facial features. You can see like this one, the face feels a lot longer. This one, it's a bit more square and angular. So again, it's just going through that same process I went through, where I'm just making my own. I feel like this one is actually kind of in between these two. So where I'm just making like organic changes as I go. And with this one, the biggest difference in why these color palettes are so different is because I mixed the colors way more in this painting. So with this one, you'll see I might mix just 2 colors together or a little bit of each. But with this one, I was pushing my values, or was pushing the color range more. So by allowing this one to be closer to using as few like individual colors as possible, I was able to get a color palette that I'm much happier with, even though this one uses the same color. Another thing, that 2 specific colors to avoid if you're going for something like this are brown and green, because there are some, it's hard to see, but there are some greens in here and there's some greens in here, and that really naturalizes and like mutes down the color palette. And of course, then I went with like a more natural hair color, and it just really shifts the palette overall. These are both fun and I like them both, but if you're going for something a bit more ethereal and kind of otherworldly, then we want to avoid some of those more like natural colors. So it's interesting to see how different they can be using the same colors. So now I'm going to just lightly lighten this sketch a bit, and I'm just gonna like rub this back and forth. You can see it lightens it a lot. It's still visible, but it's much lighter, and that's gonna allow it to not show through as much when we get to painting. If I'm looking at this kind of as a color example, I think the kind of the featured color here that I'm seeing is this reddish color. It runs throughout, and then we've got like lots of turquoise that fills in a lot of the value gaps. So I always like to start loose with my paintings. So I'm going to start laying in just some super loose stuff, and then we will hone in on some details. But the loose stuff is like the atmosphere that you kind of can't recreate if you don't do it in the very beginning. I have 2 brushes here. This one is a size 8 and this one is a size 14. These are silver black velvet round brushes. So round brushes are my favorite, and I prefer like a natural fiber because they hold more water and they're softer, which I really like for watercolors. Okay. I've got my water off to the side here, and I got a towel. I like to use, these are like flour sackcloths. It's just a cotton towel that I can use, and it's great because I can just wash them and use them again. So that's handy. Okay. I'm going to set that off to the side. And we're going to start, I should clean this real quick. We'll start with, I usually like to start with more pure colors, so a little bit less mixing during this stage, and just keep the colors nice and light and like a pure saturation, so not too much mixing. So we'll do a little bit of our yellow. Yeah, I love that color. And this is going to look a little crazy because I'm just going to start like laying it in, but it's okay because I already know that this side of the face is going to be lighter and everything else is going to be darker. So I really am going to have to, cover it all eventually of that, the side that we know we want to be a little darker. This color is a little bit more yellow. But again, we're just, at this point, we're just establishing those values and knocking back the white of the page. Okay, so for this, I want to focus on keeping the warmer values around like the eyes, under the edge of the nose and the mouth. And then I want to have some of that cool blue value around the neck and up into the background. You'll see I'm pretty much exclusively going to be working in this well right here. I like to keep my mixing to a limited area because it helps the color palette to be more cohesive. So like the only colors that can be here are colors that are already on the painting. And it just helps the colors to mesh together a little bit better. Even if everything looks really, bright and colorful, we've still got some cohesion because the colors all kind of mix together. I love that step where I can like get in some color on the background because that's when you start to see the values pop through a little bit more because now we've got that lighter area of the face showing and a lot of the white of the page is starting to disappear. So right now I'm going to make a kind of very bold choice that's going to help me in the long run. I'm mixing a really dark color here. This is probably, I'll probably clean up some of this to be honest when I move on to other things, but by laying in a darker value early on, it helps you to better see like the range of values in your painting as opposed to, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of time working on an area when all I have are really light things. And then when you go and put in your darker value, everything else looks way too light. So by putting in a dark value early on, I'm hopefully going to be able to better balance the painting process and help that move along a bit quicker and a bit smoother. As far as like saturation of the colors, I
Mhm.
usually try to start this early, like this first initial layer, knowing that most of this is going to have more layers go on top of it. This early layer, I like to keep things as far as like more saturated, even if they're lighter in color, and then I can build more muted tones on top of that because with watercolors, because everything is relatively transparent, I'm going to be able to adjust the saturation of even the colors that are here now as I go. But the more I build on top of them and the more I layer, they're going to become less saturated. So if I can start with more saturated colors, it's easier than trying to put it in later. So if we have like a light, airy base to build on, that's maybe more saturated than we want it to be, we can tone it down as we work. It's harder to do it the other way around, if that makes sense. Okay, so now as this layer is starting to dry, I have to choose where I want hard edges and where I want soft edges. So I want to leave the shadow under the lip here because that's like a cast shadow from the lip. So that gets like a harder shadow. Like if you could see my shadow from my hand, it would be a hard shadow. Like when you look at your shadow when you're outside, you can see the hard lines. But when something is just curving away from the light, like my hand here, you can see there's like a shadow here. This is like a soft shadow because it's just from the curvature of the object. It's not a cast shadow where it's casting a shadow onto something else. So for these curving shadows, I want to soften the edge. So I'm going to soften the nose edge here because the nose is just curving away from the light. And I'm going to soften this chin edge down here. And sometimes I'll choose to break that rule because I like the way a hard shadow looks and I think it adds something to the painting. Like up here, this edge is a bit harder, but I'm going to leave it because I like the shape that's created on the forehead. So I'm not going to soften that out because I don't want to lose the shape. Same thing with under here. I like the shape that's being created here, so I'm not going to soften that out. We've got a lot of this like red color pooling here, so I have to decide if I want it to be there. I'm going to move it up into the nose and around the eyes. Okay, now before I dry this, I want to add a bit more loose color around the eyes. So this is pretty saturated, but I'm wiping the color on my brush because I don't want to have too much paint on my brush right now because I don't want it to spread too far. So I'm just dropping this in around like the bags of the eyes. I like to get some red in the white of the eye. I think that creates like a more emotional look. And I know that all of this is going to end up getting darkened. Like the whole eye socket is going to end up a little bit darker. I pulled a little bit of that purple just now that I used before. And I can drop that in. And then the same thing over here. I'll just drop in a bit of that darker color. Just a little bit for now. I like to keep it pretty warm though, even in the shadows. It implies that the shadows being cast are warmer, which like when skin reflects on skin, it's like if you shine a flashlight through your hand and it looks all like red, that's like the warmth of your skin. So that sort of like occlusion shadow is kind of what we're going for here. So the places where the two lips meet, I want that to be really warm. Under the nose, where like the light is kind of bouncing back and forth between the lip and the nose, I want that to be really warm. So like just now, I was trying to mix like a green color and it bled down in here. Sometimes I'll just clean part of it. And it helps that I'm only using 3 colors. So I'm not going to mix a new color every time I want to drop something in. Sometimes I'll just pull a color that's already here. So I'm not adding more to this. I'm not making this mix dirtier than it is. I can just go, okay, I know I'm going to want that to be darker. And I can take a color that I already have that is dark and drop it in. So using pre-existing colors instead of mixing a new one every time, that helps to keep things from getting muddy. And also, it's okay to work in a couple different sections. So like I have that yellow there. But there may be times in the future where I'll pull from little bits of these colors. So they can still be kind of separate even if we're in one well. So now I'm just looking for like a bluish green to lay in. For some of the shadows that are not like skin close together shadows, like up here by the hairline, again, like I said before, I don't want it to get too green because as we start to see these like neutral colors peeking in, we don't want to neutralize our painting too much. Okay, I think this is a good place. You know what, let's get a dark value in for the hair. So before I had focused on like a red base for the hair, and I'm going to do that again so we can get something close. So you can see here, I'm pulling from that purple, but the more red I add to it, the more it becomes like this new color. But really, this is just the red and the blue. There might be a little bit of yellow, but we're limited in how many colors can be in this mix. So we'll drop some of that in. See, it's a bit brown now because it was purple before. But because the colors are pretty much all already present, it doesn't make that big of a difference. So another thing that's going to change is right now, the hair is all very blocky. And I will be adding like some finer wisps of hair, but we want to start with the big shapes. And the wisps we will add closer to the end. If I try to do them now, as I work in more layers, they're just going to get like reactivated and those crisper details are going to get muddied.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and please let us know in the comments section below what stood out to you and what you'd like to see more of from us. If you'd like to continue learning, please follow the link and continue watching the next part of the full class for free. From sketching and composing an image, to understanding color and creating suggested details, Arleesha will take us on a step-by-step journey of her process of drawing and painting a full portrait using watercolor. Until next time, make more art.